On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1985. We're going to be taking a look at Sammy Davis Jr. and he's going to be performing Mr. Bojangles. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So let's get Sammy and the band up on screen and see how they get on.
Oh, check, check, oh, check, check. This song, I could not do a show without including this song. I certainly wouldn't do a show here without including it. It's very special to me. I knew a man, Bojangles, and he danced for you in worn out shoes, silver hair, ragged shirt, baggy pants. He would do the old soft shoe. He could jump so high, jump so high. And then he lightly touched down. I met him in a cell in New Orleans. I was down and out. He looked to me to be the very eyes of age. As he spoke right out, talked of life, talked of life, laughed, slapped his leg a step. He said his name was Bojangles, then he danced a lick. Right across the cell, grab his pants, take a better stance, jump up high. That's when he clicked his heels. Then he let go that laugh. Lord, 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 he let go a laugh. Shake back his clothes all around. That was Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles, the man could dance. Told me other times he worked with minstrel shows, traveling throughout the South.
I'm going to jump in here. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below so you guys can watch it the whole way through without me interrupting it, because this performance of Mr. Bojangles by Sammy Davis Jr. is so unique in the way that he delivers it, because there's so many elements of musical theatre in there, as well as great technical ability singing-wise and telling a story, and sometimes going into straight talking, which we'll have slightly later on in the performance. The whistling as well that starts off the performance. It is interesting because Sammy Davis Jr. could undoubtedly whistle in tune because of his vocal ability as well, but he's intentionally being quite loose with the pitch on the whistling sections, which we'll hear at the end as well. So it is like listening to Mr. Bojangles whistling. It's getting that other character in there. And the way that he flips from one personality to another, the storyteller, but then also to this character, Mr. Bojangles, is what sells the performance. And it is something that I've heard so many versions of this song, and this is the only performance that I've really connected to, and the only one that's made sense of the song to me so far throughout my life, because whenever I've seen it usually covered on these talent shows and somebody will be doing it because it's a particular week where they have a theme, but I've never paid attention to it because the delivery isn't as it should be, and it doesn't tell the story like Sammy Davis Jr. does, because you've got to have the ability to be able to throw in the dancing, give an example of what the guy used to dance like, and tell the story from the other person's point of view. Let me just show you guys what's going on with the guitar in the intro, and also a little bit further on. I'm not going to go through all of the chords, but we've got this E flat major 7th sound to begin with, and we've got this classic jump from the root note to the rest of the chord with the first and the second finger. So we're playing fingerstyle here, and we've got this little jump. And by the way, Sammy Davis Jr. just starts the track off himself, giving the band the groove of exactly where he wants it to sit, and they are spot on following that instruction and get straight into it. So with these chords, because we're not playing all of the strings with the right hand, we can start to simplify the shapes. So with this major 7th chord that we're starting with, our root note, the E flat, is being played with the thumb. And then we can take the second finger and play the G, and that's the G string with the first finger, and then the B string with the second finger, and then we bounce from the root note to the rest of the chord, like that. Now, as we move down, we get that sound, which is effectively a B flat, but we're using the D as the root note. So effectively we've got a B over a D chord. So it means that, again, we can simplify that part of the chord by just taking the first finger and then placing in the second and the third finger on the B and the G string. And then we're going to be shifting down 2 frets. Exactly the same shape here. So this would be like an A flat, but that part of the chord that we're keeping, when we resupply that root note, we'll give it that different sound because now the root note is the C. So as we move down, we're now to a B flat. So once we do get down to that B flat in the intro, we have the run up. So we're just ascending through the chords that we've descended through. So this, and then that'll lead us into our E flat major 7th again to start, and then we descend. And that is the intro, just those chords being looped around until Sammy Davis Jr. comes in with his vocal. Just for reference as well, when Sammy starts singing, the progression's going to move on a little bit. We're going a little bit further down. So we're starting with our E flat major 7th. So now I've gone as far as an A flat. And there's a little B flat 7th in there before the little run up again, which then starts us again. This is the thing about major 7th chords. When you start to throw them in there and keep this same pattern on the right hand of bouncing between the root note and the rest of the chord, you definitely get a jazz flavor in there. And if you start throwing some swing in there, again, it's going to push it in that direction. And then, even with that chord, you can just move it down and up. But getting back to the performance and Sammy's vocal delivery, the way that he sings this song, it makes you believe that he was actually there. The story that he's telling, he experienced it firsthand. When you have great dynamic control of your voice, as Sammy does, it means that he can sing at such a low volume and on the same level as talking that he draws you into the stage. And just brings you into that bubble. And then when performers then lean into their chest voice, for example, it's a more aggressive sound. So it is almost like taking a step back outside of that bubble and away from the stage. But this is what Sammy does. He draws you in. So it's having that ability to change your voice dynamically, taking it all the way down to a whisper, but then still have the pitch accuracy and stylization that comes with singing, and blending the style of talking and telling a story into the style of singing. And it is something that is so difficult to do, but something to look out for in this performance is at 1 minute and 36 seconds, Sammy is telling the story and he says, "I was down and out." And the out of that vocal phrase is so dead on pitch. It is crazy, the accuracy with which Sammy hits that. And then the next line as well, as he spoke right out, that ending again is pitch perfect. So Sammy has such great control of pitch, but then when he wants to get more into the storytelling, he'll then do away with the pitch. And this is it. It's bringing in the singing in a perfect way to complement the story. And it is something that with a lesser vocalist and a lesser performer all round, you'd start to focus in on the fact it's not really in tune, or maybe they look a little bit awkward on stage, they're obviously a bit nervous. So many things you instinctively pick up about somebody when they're performing on stage. But you don't think about any of that when you're watching Sammy, because he's just weaving this into the story. And it isn't that he's singing a song. It is something that you see people all the time singing songs, but they're not telling a story. For me, having done so many of these analysis videos on the channel, the markings of a top level performance is when I'm watching a video, and for example with this one, I thought I'd get the guitar out and just listen to the chords that are going on in the background, just to work my way through them and then show you guys them on the guitar. And I end up listening to the whole song again and totally forget that I started the video to listen to the chords in the intro, because I'll start listening to it, but then even with Sammy's mannerisms and the way that he acts and puts on the hat, everything is focused on him and the story and taking on that character. So the analysis takes so much longer because you totally forget about thinking, what are the chords? Because you're just drawn into the performance. But it is possible to get into the analysis when you really concentrate on not getting drawn into the performance again for the 4th or the 5th time in a row. But Sammy's voice, he's in chest voice here throughout the whole performance. And he does cover quite a range because he's got that storytelling quality to his voice. So it means that he's right down there where he would normally talk. But then we go all the way up to a G-sharp 4. And for the most part, the song is around E3. So we're definitely covering at least an octave, something that I mentioned about all the top singers have that ability in their voice to push that range beyond an octave. So the G4, actually it's the G-sharp 4, the top note. The G4 we do reach in the chorus. When we get to about 4 minutes and 13, he starts to open the taps on his voice, and that's when we get up to these E4s and G4s and that G-sharp 4 as well. You'll notice straight away because it has such a dramatic impact emotionally, and the whole mood of the piece now steps up a level because of that raise in pitch. Just before we get back into the video, let me mention about Sammy Davis Jr.'s vocal phrasing, the way that he holds off. He puts in really deliberate pauses so that when the vocal does come in, it's a little bit more dramatic than if he was coming in on the beat. It's something that we start to get so used to hearing. When there is a beat, everyone's expecting the first word of the first line to come in on beat 1 of the bar. But if you just delay that, everyone's now waiting to hear what is happening because the vocal hasn't come in yet. So what's going to happen? And as soon as it comes in, it's going to be something that the crowd have been waiting for. It is something that's going to give the vocal delivery such a conversational quality because we don't talk in time to a beat and on each beat of a bar. And if you are trying to do that, if you're trying to count along with this song, we're in 3/4 here, or 6/8 as well in short. Just count to 3 for each bar and then you'll be fine. Just to mention, Sammy at the beginning of the song tells everyone how much this song means to him. And if you don't know, Sammy started dancing at the age of 3. His dad took him on tour with him because his dad, Sammy Davis Sr, was an entertainer, a dancer as well. They were part of a dance trio, which at the age of 3 included Sammy Davis Jr. because his mum and dad had split up and his dad didn't want to lose custody of Sammy. So he was taken on tour by his dad and he performed in this dance trio with his uncle Will Mastin. And it wasn't an uncle by relation, but he was one of the dancers that was part of this show. You do really get the impression that Sammy, when he sings this, he's singing it from personal experience because this story could be about his life. But let's get back into the video and we'll watch the performance all the way to the end.
Spoke with tears of 15 years how his dog and he, they would travel about. But his dog up and died. The dog just got old and died. And after 20 years he still grieved. He said I dance now at every chance in honky-tonks. For my drinks and tips, but most of the time I spend behind these county bars. You see, son, I drinks a bit. Then he shook his head. I could swear I heard someone say please. That's Mr. Bojangles. Call him Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles, come back. Dance, dance, dance. Mr. Bojangles. Please, Bojangles, we need to see you dance again. Mr. Bo, Mr. Bo, Mr. Bojangles.
And there we have it. What a performance that was from every single aspect that you can possibly look at it. I haven't even mentioned about the band because the dynamic changes that we have throughout this whole performance, the way that the accents just match perfectly, and Sammy, obviously, when he kicks out and does the dancing, is hitting those accents as well. And this is something that the great performers and all-round performers like Sammy, there's not many of them, but they can draw you into a performance so that you're no longer listening to a guy singing a song. You are experiencing a story, being able to take you to a totally different place dynamically, and also with the pitch. Just when he opens up the taps on his vocals, let's bear in mind as well that he's 59 in this performance. So he's still got all of that range, all of that control. Here we're looking at a 6-minute performance, and you don't think at any point, oh, when's it going to finish? Or it is going on a bit long now. And that is just the hallmarks of a fantastic performance all round, but a fantastic performer, because they keep you engaged the whole time. I do want to cover a bit of Sammy's history and his career. We'll pick it up from where he was 3 years of age, dancing with his dad and uncle. Something that his dad and uncle did for Sammy at a very young age was shield him from racism, because there would be that. At the shows, people would be shouting out things, but they told Sammy that it was because of his dancing and they were jealous of it. So that's always what Sammy saw it as. Unfortunately, in 1942, when he was 18 years of age, he was drafted into the US Army. And this is when he realized that he had been shielded from racism his whole life up until that point, because he suffered abuse from white soldiers. He said himself that he would have a knockdown, drag out fight every 2 days, and his nose is broken multiple times, and that's why it sat flat on his face, because of all of that abuse that he went through. He was reassigned to the Special Services branch, and this is when he started performing for the troops. And it was the case that he was then performing for the people that had previously abused him, but he said that his talent was his weapon. And after his discharge from the army, he returned to dancing with his family. He also recorded some blues tracks for Capitol Records in 1949, and this would have been when he was about 25 years of age. Also dancing with his uncle and his dad, he opened for Janice Page, and their performance time was set at 20 minutes. But then Sammy started doing his impressions, and it lasted for an hour. And it was so successful and popular that Janice said that the bill should be reversed. So they should be the headline act and she should go on before them. So this is when Sammy started to get his own success and be known as a performer in his own right. He also started to release albums at this time. So in the early 50s, he was having a lot of success, and in 1953, he was offered his own TV show, but unfortunately that didn't materialize, and in 1954, he sang the title song to the movie Six Bridges to Cross. Also in 1954, that was the year of Sammy's crash, where he lost his left eye. And the reason for that was, if you know what a Cadillac steering wheel looked like in 1954 and 1955, it had a raised section in the middle of it. And it's almost like the end of a bullet, but it's not sharp, it is rounded, but it protrudes from the steering wheel. And when Sammy had his accident, he was thrown into the steering wheel, and that connected with his left eye. So he lost that. And at the time, one of his friends, an actor called Jeff Chandler, said that he would donate his eye if it meant that Sammy Davis Jr. could retain any of his sight in that eye. So unfortunately they couldn't do that, and then for months afterwards, Sammy would wear an eye patch. On his debut album, which was called Starring Sammy Davis Jr., he was wearing the eye patch, but then he did get fitted for a glass eye, and this is what he wore for the rest of his life. In 1956 is when he was starring on Broadway in the musical Mr. Wonderful, and towards the end of the decade is when he got together with his mate Frank Sinatra and was part of the Rat Pack. And this meant that he was starring in movies, but also performing with Frank and Dean Martin as well, and these were a huge draw on the Las Vegas Strip. Unfortunately, this is where we get another insight into how things were back in the late 50s, early 60s, because Las Vegas had Jim Crow practices still prevalent. So it meant that there was racial segregation, and whenever Sammy would perform, he then had to leave the main strip and go to the west side of the city and stay there, and then come back to perform. When he performed, black artists and performers were not allowed dressing rooms, so they just had to stand behind the stage and wait until they went on, and that could be for hours at a time. Obviously, if they're waiting for the whole show and the other acts to go on first, they couldn't stay in the hotels where they were performing, and they weren't allowed to gamble, eat, or drink at any of the hotels or the venues. It was later in his career that he would then refuse to work at places that did practice racial segregation. But it is something that, unfortunately, you can't believe this happened, but it did. Fortunately, we have moved on. And it was a massive part of his breakthrough when he was offered a special on Canadian TV. And this was on CBC because in the USA, there wasn't a great deal of black performers and black artists that were on TV at that point. For reference, that CBC special was in 1959. And fast forwarding to 1964, this is where Sammy was appearing in the musical Golden Boy. And he was doing that at nighttime, but then during the day, he was recording his talk show, and if he ever had a day off, he'd spend that in the recording studio. He was still massively popular in Las Vegas. Towards the end of the 60s, his music was in decline from a popularity perspective, but he still did have a #1 in 1969 with I've Gotta Be Me. Moving into the 1970s, he had another #1 with The Candyman, and that was in 1972. He was also appearing on TV a lot. He was a huge fan of daytime TV, and he was acting and had a regular part in One Life to Give. It was in 1988 that he was due to tour with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, but unfortunately, Frank and Dean had a bit of a falling out, so Liza Minnelli joined the lineup for that tour. And in 1989 is when he was diagnosed with throat cancer, and that's when he was performing on that tour. Unfortunately, he had smoked his whole life, sometimes as many as 4 packs a day. And because of the throat cancer, it meant that he couldn't sing anymore. He did actually have his larynx removed. And sadly, he passed away in 1990 at the age of 64. But it's great to have a look back at Sammy live in 1985 at the age of 59, delivering a standalone performance of Mr. Bojangles. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!